I'm the Bible Charts Guy, and this chart is your roadmap for the entire book of Job. Download it in the description below, hit subscribe, and let's learn about the book of Job. Poetry can be evaluated both by the beauty of its individual lines and its conformity to an intentional structure, both by its rose and its vase. Now, the book of Job in the Bible has both beautiful roses, its poetic lines, and a sophisticated structure, its vase. Now take a look at Job's lament in chapter 3. This is great. After this, Job opened his mouth and he cursed the day of his birth. Now, how did he do that? With what poetic lines? Let the day perish on which I was born. Let that day, let it be darkness. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes. It's depressing, but it's beautiful. However, this short video will focus not on the roses, but the vase, the structure and the design of the book of Job as a whole, and it is equally compelling. Now, the book of Job has 5 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It begins with a prologue where Satan is permitted to test Job, and then it's followed by a dialogue between Job and his friends where they try to convince him of his sin, followed by a central poem with special interpretive power for the book of Job as a whole. This is followed by 3 monologues, and this is where God is finally going to step in, answer Job, and speak from the whirlwind. Followed at the end by a epilogue in chapter 42 where Job is restored. Now these 3 monologues in 29 to 42 are designed to parallel 3 cycles of debate between Job and his friends in 3 to 27. Now you probably recall the back and forth nature of Job's argument with his friends in this section, but what you might not have noticed is that these chapters are extremely structured and orderly. So they will begin in chapter 4 with Eliphaz's speech, followed by Job's response. And then Bildad will speak and Job will respond. And then finally Zophar will make his contribution and Job again will respond. Now this elaborate dance is going to continue for 2 more cycles in the exact same order. And again, these 3 cycles of debate match precisely the 3 monologues later in the book. But the parallels continue. Think about how the end of the book is a mirror inversion of its beginning. So the book begins with the devastation of Job, but it ends with his restoration. And what about Job's friends? When do they show up? Well, it's not in chapter 4. No, Job's friends first show up in chapter 2 and they comfort him in silence. Now, this is certainly Job's friends at their best. When his 3 friends heard of all the evil, all the raw that came upon him, they came to show sympathy and comfort to him. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and this is key, no one spoke a word to him. So, Job's friends, they are commended for their silence in chapter 2, but they are rebuked for their speech in chapter 42. Look at this, the end of the book now. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, now he's going to speak to Eliphaz, his friend, and he's going to say, "My anger burns against you and your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." And then there's chapter 28, the all-important wisdom poem here at the center of the book, which is designed to stand apart from the dialogues which came before it and the monologues which come after it. Now let me show you what I mean by stand apart from. Let's jump into chapter 25 and see how it is introduced. Chapter 25, then Bildad answered and said. Let's go to the next chapter, 26. Then Job answered and said. Okay, 27. Then again, Job took up his discourse and said. We got a pattern going on here. Now let's jump over the wisdom poem in 28 to chapter 29. How is 29 introduced? Then Job again took up his discourse and said. But chapter 28 stands apart from all of this because it has no introduction. Why? That is because The wisdom poem here in 28 is not spoken by Job, nor by his friends, but by the narrator himself. And it plays a critical role in the purpose and message of the book. And what is the message of Job, by the way? Well, I'm glad you asked. But in order to answer that, we must first recognize Job's position in the Hebrew canon. You see, the books in our Christian Old Testament are in a different order than the same books in the Hebrew Bible or the Jewish Bible. Same books, different order. This Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh, standing for the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Now, Job, it's located here in the Ketuvim, and this is relevant for our interpretation of the book of Job because all 11 books in the Ketuvim have a shared purpose. They are designed to answer the questions that are raised by the horrors of the Babylonian exile. All 11 books in the Ketuvim are about the exile. The book of Job is designed to be read by someone like Daniel or Shadrach or Mordecai. And now, how would a book like Job provide unique comfort and encouragement to someone like Daniel? Well, what did Job and Daniel have in common? They were both innocent sufferers. Daniel is one of the few people in the whole Bible where it records nothing that he did wrong, and yet he was a slave in a foreign country. And Job, his innocence, that fact is central to the logic of the whole book. However, it goes deeper than that. Job, as a Gentile, becomes an image of the Jewish righteous remnant. So just like Daniel or Mordecai, Job is going to experience the covenant curses of the Torah without violating the laws of the Torah. So notice how the suffering of Job maps precisely onto the covenant curses in Deuteronomy 28. So here's the suffering of Job on the left. Satan went out and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Now the covenant curses in Deuteronomy 28. The Lord will strike you with grievous boils. This is the same Hebrew word for loathsome sores, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. However, did Job's suffering have the last word? No. In chapter 42, Job is restored. The Lord restored the fortunes of Job and gave him twice as much as he had before. He had 7,000 sheep, now he has 14,000. He had 3,000 camels, now he has 6,000. His possessions were exactly doubled. Why? Well, that is because both Job's suffering and his restoration map precisely onto the exile of Israel and her promised restoration in the prophets. Take a look at God's promised doubling restoration in Zechariah chapter 9. This is the same passage that talks about your king humble and mounted on a donkey in verse 12, Zechariah 9, return, come back from exile, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double. And this phrase, to restore the fortunes of, is used 28 times in the Hebrew Bible. And every time it is applied to Israel's return from exile and their restoration after defeat. The only time that it applies to an individual is here in Job 42, verse 10. That is because this individual represents the nation of Israel and her king who would likewise suffer greatly for no sins of his own and would therefore be qualified to intercede for and to offer an atoning sacrifice for the nations. Job plays a crucial role in the Ketuvim, but so does the book of Chronicles. If you need a little convincing that 1st and 2nd Chronicles are not the most boring books in the Bible, you should check out this next video.